So this is the lecture for Stupidity Deconstructed. And it's also going to lay the foundation for the next couple weeks, because what we're talking about is the politics of knowledge. It's basically social epistemology and political epistemology, an intersection of the two. And epistemology, I mean, this is probably a new word, but it has to do with knowledge and belief. And traditional epistemic questions are like, can we know stuff? What is knowledge? What's a belief? What's a justification? That's traditional epistemology. It's the sort of stuff you're probably familiar with. If you've ever heard the phrase like skeptic, or you've read Descartes' Meditations, like what they're talking about is traditional epistemic concerns. It's very important stuff. And I don't mean to imply that it's not important by not talking about it in this class. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to skip past that and just assume that whatever answer to those questions are, like whatever is true about how we can answer those questions, we can still analyze what's going on in our social epistemic activities. So when you see the word epistemic, just think it has to do with knowing and belief. So the basic claim operating in the background in the next 3 weeks is that some people in our society, in our communities, some people, due to features that have nothing to do with their epistemic capacities, so their ability to know something, their ability to believe something, their ability to understand something, their ability to testify, which means just communicate about their experiences, that for reasons unrelated to their epistemic capacities, such as their race, their gender, their economic class, their religion, their education level, for some reason unrelated to that, they are treated as less epistemically capable and are undermined in their epistemic capacities. So for instance, here's one example of that. It makes, it's completely unreasonable for us to think that Black people can't be scientists because the vast majority of scientific progress was made by white people, when for a really long time Black people weren't able to go to school. And when they were able to go to school, it wasn't the same institutions that white people got to go to school at. Lots of schools were segregated into the 70s and 80s in the United States, right? So you see, look at this body of evidence that we have that white people are very smart and Black people aren't. And then you start to look at it, it's actually Black people are actively undermined in their ability to become or act as effective epistemic agents, to do things with knowledge and information. And not only that, when they were doing those things, they were treated as if they weren't, right? So that's one example. Another example, I think, is a little bit more readily accessible for people who are, most of y'all from Texas and Oklahoma, so this is probably going to be something you're familiar with. My mother is from the Deep South. She's a really thick Southern accent when she was younger. She's flattened it out a lot now. She's really good at code switching, so pick up whatever accent is being used in the room, which is a little unfortunate, but she's from the Deep South. She's from the panhandle of Florida, Pensacola. She's living in Chicago. It's the late 80s, early 90s. So she's 19, and she's got a job as a cashier, and she's trying to check this guy out. And it's not scanning, the product isn't scanning. So she says into the microphone, "I need a price check. I want some ass." And her manager comes running over, and he's like, You can't say that into the microphone. And she's like, "Well, I can't say what? I need a price check on some ass." And he says, "You're saying a cuss word like it's a joke. You're fired." And my mom's like, "I'm not saying that. I'm saying ass." And this guy steps out of line and he says, "Hey, I'm a accent and dialect expert over at the local college. She's actually from this part of the South, and they don't say ice, they say ass." Whatever happens in the story, really not important anymore. What I want to highlight are two things. One, right, because of my mother's accent and probably her gender and age, the manager made an assumption about what she was doing. And my mom is saying, "I'm not doing that," and she's not treated as credible, right, because of this feature that she doesn't have any control of, her accent, or and despite the fact that she's saying, I'm not saying that, I'm saying this, and you just don't understand me, right? She's not taken seriously. And it's not until somebody who is not her does not look like her, does not sound like her, says, I'm an expert on her experiences, and she is actually saying ice and not ass. My mom is taken seriously. So not only can my mom not testify to her own experiences, and a man who is not her, and it could have been a woman, but in this case I do think that it matters that it's a man because her manager was a man, but he is educated, he is an expert, and so he gets to be an expert on my mom's intentions and her expertise, like of her own experiences, right? And that's the basic claim that's going to be operating in the background over the next couple of weeks, is that there are certain people that, due to features unrelated to their epistemic capacities, are treated as less epistemically credible and are undermined in their ability to be epistemic agents. And we're going to see various examples of this. And I'll give you guys another example. One I think is like much more familiar to, because of like the prevalence of social like videos on TikTok and Vine and YouTube and whatnot. Like you probably have heard, like much more likely to have heard African American vernacular English than in the past. Like not just like performances of that dialect, but like genuine speakers of that dialect. This is also sometimes called Ebonics, but it's AAVE. It's a dialect of English, not just an accent, but like a straight up dialect, right? And a lot of people associate AAVE with poor Black people from the South. And they think it is not legitimate English. And because of that, if you speak in that accent, you are going to be targeted like as somebody less epistemically competent, and maybe even denied epistemic opportunities because you're speaking in that accent. And I'll give you guys an example of this from my own life. I went to a daycare center where all the adults and most of the children spoke AAVE. So I spoke AAVE when I was outside of my home. It's just that dialect that I knew people communicated in public with. When I started formal school, so kindergarten and public school, I was penalized for speaking AAVE. So I lost the dialect. I lost the ability to speak it because it was considered a mark of, for lack of a better way to put it, stupidity, of being uneducated, despite it being just like a legitimate way people speak. Like it's just it's a dialect, right? So you guys might have encountered this, like you've experienced somebody being called out for this. You might have like heard your parents talk about it a particular way, or actually yourself been called out for speaking AAVE. There's no reason to think that somebody's accent is an or dialect, is an indication of their epistemic capacities. Like we don't we hear a British person talking and we don't think, wow, this person is stupid, they don't know how to speak English, right? It's the same thing when you hear somebody speaking AAVE and you think, they're just too stupid to know what's going on, I shouldn't trust what they say. That's operating in the background here. The additional aspect of it is, oftentimes, the sorts of things that people are being singled out for as making them less epistemically efficacious are the sorts of things that make them socially inferior in a hierarchy. So women, people of color, trans people, LGBT people more generally, religious minorities, poor people, like people who lack more power in society are more likely to experience this treatment in negative ways. So what do I mean by that? So Kadie is going to talk about like poor people, particularly poor people of color, are going to be treated as stupid in a way that other people aren't, simply because they're poor people. Now you might have heard oh man, teenage boys are dumb, or boys are dumb, men are dumb, and you think like, okay, so I hear that, like, isn't that epistemically problematic? And yes, but it's for a different reason, right? It's not because men are like socially disadvantaged. It's for another reason. And like we can speculate on what that is, but that's very unimportant. But the argument that Kadie and the feminist standpoint theorists and the epistemic injustice stuff is going to make is that there's a particular type of epistemic mistreatment that stems from one's social position as inferior in a social hierarchy. Now, that doesn't mean you literally are inferior. It just means like you have less like power, you're singled out, you're marginalized. these sorts of like empirically and anecdotally like observable marginalizations in society of people with particular identity features. Whereas the mechanism in like, oh, men are stupid is different. It's not about the inferiority of men, it's about something else. So, what are you going to do with the Kadie Deconstructed? Why are we reading this? Well, one, I felt it's accessible. Two, you've probably been called stupid, and it might have been because of your social class. The vast majority of people in the United States are actually poor. So most of us probably have an experience with that. You can also very readily recognize this process of deconstruction, which is not just like trying to understand how a term is used, but trying to understand one's relationship to the term. So that's what Kadie's doing. She's trying to understand not just how like the term develops and how it's applied, but how she's experienced the term and what that's led her to do and how it's led her to see the world. And the one other thing that I want you to like really try to pay attention to in this deconstruction text, or this stupidity deconstructed text, is this: because the people who have privilege in society don't need or don't value the sort of intelligence and epistemic capacities on display that Kadie recognizes in like just the day-to-day activities of the people she grew up with, and because they just don't value these people. Stupidity and intelligence are defined in such a way that it's always going, so intelligence is always going to exclude what they're doing, and stupidity is always going to include what the lower class, are doing, because the people that get to control and define these terms like carve the world in this way, like carve our social reality in this way. So in essence, lower class people are not just stupid, they're like epistemically, like they just aren't as capable of knowing. And what they do epistemically doesn't count as knowledge. And that's the important upshot, the important takeaway of this particular reading.